Hello, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Chris from My Core Balance, and you are listening to the Ask Trainer Chris podcast. Today, I had a great question from a client. His whole concern was basically centered around wanting to develop his glutes, or his buttocks muscles, because he felt like he couldn't feel them, he couldn't engage them. So based on his particular set of muscle imbalances, after we did a quick assessment, I concluded that he has tight hip flexors, tight quads, and this probably applies to you too. So most of us sit way too much. So what that does is that tightens up the hip flexors, it shortens the hip flexors. And the hip flexor does exactly what it says it does. It flexes the hip, or it takes you into a 90-degree angle at the hip. Now, that's not that big of a deal. I mean, tight hip flexors, it's going to give you bad posture and stuff like that, but it's also going to really mess up your ability to engage your glutes. Because if you think about it like this, the glute and the hip flexor are opposite muscles, right? A muscle is a lot like, the computer programming language where they have the ones and the zeros. I'm not a computer programmer. I don't even know what that means, the ones and the zeros, but I know that there are no twos. There are only ones and zeros. So let's just say, for the sake of muscle activation, a 1 is a fully activated muscle and a 0 is a relaxed muscle, and like a fully actual relaxed muscle. So basically, with my client, what was happening is that he was not flexible and didn't have a range of motion, wasn't able to elongate the hip flexor and the quad enough to actually make it a true 0. So because of that, he couldn't make his glute actually fire 100%. So if instead of the 1 it's 100%, and instead of a 0 it's 0%. So there are gradients with muscles, right? With computers it's either a 1 or a 0. With the muscle activation, there are percentages. So let's say, for example, you can sort of stretch your quad, but it doesn't quite get 100% to relaxed. So you're maybe still at like 10 to 20% tension in that quad. Well, guess what? That's 10 to 20% of activation that you're losing out of on the glute. So say, for example, you have 100% total and your quad is taking up 20%, then you can only get to 80% activation in your glute, no matter how hard you try, until you get to that root of that cause, which is to release the opposite muscle. So hopefully that makes sense. This kind of goes along with, there's another fitness and just movement in general concept called reciprocal inhibition. And now, if you want to rebalance your body, this is one of the most important concepts that you need to know. Basically, reciprocal inhibition says this: when you are going to engage a muscle, the opposite muscle relaxes. Now, I will go on to say that that is supposed to happen. It is supposed to relax. But most people's issues are when, kind of what I was just saying with the glute and the hip flexor and my client earlier today. It's a big issue that you can't actually relax a muscle. Muscles can only do two things. They can engage or relax. So, basically the takeaway is this: if you're trying to develop a muscle, of course you want to think about what that muscle does. Like, for example, the glute is a hip extender, so you need to do exercises that extend the hips, so bridges and donkey kicks and squats and things like that. And really need to start thinking about the opposite muscle group and stretching that muscle group and really creating some mobility and flexibility around the joint so that the muscle group that you're trying to work actually gets to work. And that is, again, that's crucial. And that goes with any muscle. Every muscle has at least one opposite, so this technique can apply to any of those muscles. Hope that helps. If you have any questions, let me know. If you're in the Anchor app, you can do a call in. If you're not in the Anchor app and you're listening on iTunes or on Google or any of those other devices, you can email me, chris@mycorebalance.com. Feel free to also text me at 408-883-4442. Have a great day. Thank you so much for listening, and go out and keep moving and be fit. All right. Peace out.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.